IMF boss Christine Lagarde is back in court this Friday in a corruption inquiry that threatens to plunge the fund into another leadership crisis. A very warm welcome to World Business Report with me, Alice Baxter. In just a minute, we'll be looking to see how Asian markets are doing a day after that dramatic sell-off. But first this hour, the head of the International Monetary Fund, Christine Lagarde, is back in court later today. On Thursday, she faced 13 hours of questioning by a Paris magistrate over her role as then French finance minister in a huge arbitration payment that was made to a supporter of the former president Nicolas Sarkozy. Well, Ms. Lagarde insists she has done nothing wrong and that the IMF says it continues to express confidence in her. Well, she'll find out today if she's to be placed under formal investigation, a significant step under French law. Well, it could mean that she would face trial and could call her continued leadership of the IMF into question.
Voted one of the world's most powerful women by Forbes magazine this week, Christine Lagarde is now fighting to clear her name in this long-running inquiry into corruption. The case dates back to 1993, when this man, Bernard Tapie, sold his stake in the sports company Adidas. The tycoon asked the state bank Crédit Lyonnais to sell his share. They made a fortune on the deal. Bernard Tapie did not. And so he sued. For over 15 years, the legal action bounced back and forth through the highest courts of the land, until 2007, when President Nicolas Sarkozy suggested that the French finance ministry, then overseen by Mrs. Lagarde, move the case to arbitration. The result was a €285 million payment to Mr. Tapie, who had supported Mr. Sarkozy's bid for the presidency. When first appointed to the IMF, Mrs. Lagarde denied arbitration was payback for Mr. Tapie's political support.
There is, as concerns what you call the Tapie affair, an investigation that is underway. Obviously, I want all these questions clarified. I have every confidence in the procedure, not least because my conscience is perfectly clear.
But did she anticipate that the procedure would involve, as it did in March, a police raid on her Paris apartment? As IMF chief, she could have avoided this summons, pleading diplomatic immunity. But she has always insisted she's nothing to hide. On Thursday, she sat through a marathon session in front of the investigating magistrate for 13 hours. The IMF's former chief, Dominique Strauss-Kahn, was forced to step down in 2011 over a sex assault scandal. His French compatriot, Mrs. Lagarde, is there to restore its reputation. Another investigation involving the head of the organization is clearly unwelcome.
This is not good for the IMF and it's not good for the European Union. After the Dominique Strauss-Kahn disgrace and resignation, the IMF put in place a very high standard contract for Christine Lagarde, which is the first ever to be published on the internet. And it sets out that the managing director not only has to keep to the highest standards of ethics, but has to strive at all times to avoid any appearance of impropriety. So already, even the fact that she's in court is difficult to reconcile with that contract.
In other words, if Christine Lagarde is placed under formal investigation later today, she could be forced to resign, leaving the IMF in yet another leadership crisis. Nkemi Fejika, BBC News.
Now, Asian markets are bouncing back. Tokyo's Nikkei in particular has been surging after Thursday's 7% plunge that wiped more than $300 billion off the value of leading Japanese shares. Well, it was until a moment ago. Well, let's head straight over to Sharanjit Lail, who's in Singapore for us, and find out how things are faring at the moment. Sharanjit.
Well, that's right. You said it, Alice. They were rising about 3%, but they're now suddenly lower, basically extending those huge losses we saw on Thursday. That's when it plunged about 7.3%. That was the steepest one-day fall in 2 years, and that was essentially on expectations the US would ease back on monetary support. We also saw weak economic data on Chinese manufacturing, also helping spark Thursday's. He'd introduced a set of monetary and fiscal policies that that were incredibly aggressive and designed essentially to jolt the country out of a 20-year deflation cycle. We are seeing, of course, other markets like Australia as well. They're lower, and that's essentially due to a sell-off in bank shares, which are headed for their largest weekly drop in a year over there. Analysts essentially saying this is mainly due to a lot of investor uncertainty emanating from the volatility we're seeing in Japan.
OK, Sharon Jett, for now, many thanks for that view from Singapore. Well, let's get a little bit more analysis now and talk to David Jones, Chief Market Strategist at IG. David, good to see you.
Morning.
We're just hearing that from Sharon Jett. Speculation abounds as to the various reasons that led to that dramatic fall that we saw in Asian shares yesterday. What do you make of it all?
I think the FT today, the front page of the FT nails it, where it said there are lots of explanations, and there always are after the fact, of course. Everyone's got lots of great reasons why something's happened. But really, there was an element of everyone just waiting for this excuse to sell. We've seen markets rise relentlessly. As I said in the report there, particularly in the Nikkei, it's up 42% this year. And everyone is feeling, well, this can't carry on much longer, but the market, of course, carries on up. Then we did have those slightly concerning words from Mr. Bernanke out of the US. A slowdown in Chinese economic expansion yesterday morning, and some concerns, I think, about monetary policy in Japan. So we had these three things that I think just seem to have spooked investors, and is often the case when we've seen markets rise strongly. If they do start to sell off, almost selling begets more selling, and people just all head for the exits at once. And that's where we see the big plunges like we saw yesterday.
So what do you think we'll see going forward? As you say, all things that go up must come down. We are seeing now that already the Nikkei is rebounding quite strongly.
Yeah, we have seen a fair bit of volatility overnight in Asia. I think the next big test for the markets is a week today. We've got the US unemployment data traditionally released the first Friday of the month. So I think that will be the next test. So maybe for the next 5 days, we'll just have somewhat choppy, nervous markets until we see the state of the US economy. But it's definitely, I think that bullish sentiment has definitely been given something of it, just at least a slight knock this week.
As you say, this data coming out of the US, focus is always on it. And of course, yesterday, one of the key reasons that we looked at as a reason for this sharp fall in the Nikkei in particular was these mixed messages coming out of the Fed. How important is the Federal Reserve for the stability of world markets and what it says?
It's massively important. I think the role that central banks have played the last few years when we've come out of, for example, the European financial crisis and the greater economic slowdown, there are many people who would argue that stock markets have been pumped up to artificial levels because of the amount of quantitative easing that we've seen for central banks. And of course, the worry is, this is one of the things that spooked markets this week, if the central banks decide to suddenly rein in the amount of money they're pumping into markets, is it going to be like pulling a rug out from underneath markets? And that's why we've seen markets spooked. So I think market investors and traders are very obsessed at the moment with which way central bank sentiment is going.
And one thing markets don't like is being a little bit uncertain about things, isn't it? OK, David Jones from IG, many thanks.
Thank you.
Now, some other news for you. OK, let's have a quick look to see how the markets are doing at the moment. There are the numbers, currently all trading down. The Nikkei obviously was up only a few moments ago. So as David was saying, things all still a bit jittery. OK, that's all from me for now. But do join me very shortly for a look through the morning papers with Becca.